Welcome to Boom, where we have
Biomechanics on our minds.
Boom.
Boom, boom, boom.
Boom.
Today, we are talking with Ray Browning and Zach Lerner from Biomotum. Ray is the CEO and co-founder of Biomotum. He's an entrepreneur, innovator, and clinical researcher with 30 years of product development, startup, academic, and Fortune 100 experience, including with Nike. Zach is the chief science officer and co-founder of Biomotum, and Zach is also an associate professor at Northern Arizona University and a leader in rehabilitation robotics research. Thank you both so much for being with us. We're really excited to talk with you. This came about, I think, from seeing you actually in the lab. You had a user actually wearing one of your devices from Biomotum, one of our lab mates, and I look over and he's walking down the hall with it, and yeah, it was really exciting. So we're happy to really have you on and learn more about it.
It's great to be here. Thank you.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
We've already had some fun stories with you all offline before the interview, and I'm excited to start with your stories, sort of where it all began. Our first question is, when did you first know that you wanted to be biomechanists or maybe involved in rehabilitation research, or however you want to define yourself?
Yeah, good question. I was like a lot of 17 or 18-year-olds, I grew up in a small town in the mountains of Colorado, went to Colorado State University, thought that I was good in math and science, so I wanted to get into engineering. And almost immediately when I got there, I connected with a professor who was involved in what I would call the early kind of advent of biomedical engineering. So I was working on, we helped him with some Doppler blood flow meters and some other things, and got involved in some other projects that were really using my engineering, my growing engineering arsenal to address human or biological problems. And that just sounded really cool. That sounded like a really interesting idea that, wow, you can apply these principles to lots of things related to helping others, whether those are human or animal. And that was really kind of the way that I put the two pieces together. And then my first job out of college as a mechanical engineer was working for Rollins Sporting Goods, and ended up spending most of my time in Haiti in a baseball factory. Had nothing to do with biomechanics, but it was a life-altering experience in a lot of ways. And then came back and had some other things happen in life, wanted to kind of better align my passions with a continuing education. And I did my master's degree, supposed to be a PhD, but ended up with a master's degree at UCLA with Bob Greger, studying cycling mechanics, because I was really into bike racing at that time. And I wanted to combine my passion of athletics with my engineering skills. So that's kind of how it started for me.
Yeah, I think.
Oh, go ahead, Zach.
I don't know if you're looking for my story as well. If you want to comment on Ray's.
This is good, actually. Please. We want to hear from you too.
Ray was going to pretend to be you, but it's better that now we've got you. So
yeah, that would have been
better.
Good.
Yeah,
it would have been much more entertaining.
I doubt it.
I think similar to Ray, I kind of was predisposed to the engineering mindset and kind of just knew I was going to get into engineering. But I actually kind of switched majors a few times in college between mechanical engineering and exercise science, because I was really just inherently interested in studying the human body and biomechanics. And for me, going into graduate school in biomedical engineering was the perfect way to combine those things. I was fortunate enough to earn a position into Ray's lab at Colorado State when he was a professor there. And that's where Ray and I kind of kicked off our over 10 years of our relationship. And one of the driving factors for me was around the time when I started college, my mom had a hip joint replacement around when she was around 50 years old, which is relatively young for someone. And she had a teenage injury where she severed her sciatic nerve which caused her to walk with a drop foot for the next 20, 30 years. And so that pathological gait pattern eventually resulted in abnormal wear on her hip joint. And that just was really interesting to me. I wanted to learn more about why that was happening to certain people, and if we could design interventions and wearable devices that could prevent that from happening. Because, as you have a hip joint replacement that young, it's very likely that you're going to have a subsequent replacement. And every time you replace a joint, the integrity of the underlying tissue degrades. And so it's possible that you may end up in a wheelchair. And so that was pretty impactful for me, and really drove a lot of the kind of research questions and directions. And one of the projects that Ray and I got to work on together was on the opposite end of the lifespan, working with children. And I think there's just immense potential when studying pediatric conditions and disorders, because you're able to change someone's entire lifelong trajectory, and you can be really impactful with small changes in the very beginning.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I think to anyone, it is really motivating when we think about how our engineering skills can be applied to helping people, like Ray was talking about, but then especially with people, in your own life, and seeing that firsthand, how the impacts on mobility can make a huge difference. That's extremely motivating as well. And I like your point with children, they're shaped at such a young age, and being able to really help them in a way that will affect the rest of their lives, like that's really impactful. So so it makes sense that you are where you are, and we're excited to learn more about how you are helping children and people with mobility disorders. One thing that caught my attention, though, is that you said you've had over 10 years of collaboration, and then, eventually has led to the founding of Biomotum together. And I'm curious, what about your relationship has really supported this long-term collaboration and then eventually forming a company together? Maybe Zach, do you want to start with this one?
Yeah, I want to hear the answers, Zach. Should I?
I don't know if there's a big secret. It just kind of, happened. Ray and I work really well together. We have I found that my PhD with him was really successful, and I, earned my PhD and still really liked and respected Ray. And so I wanted to keep working with him. At that point, he was transitioning into a position at Nike. And, several years later, when I wanted to start translating some of the technology in my research lab into commercial products where they can have a much bigger societal impact, I reached out to Ray, and I was begging him to collaborate again and see if we could work on this project together.
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Zach and I just,
side of that,
I wanted in the academic setting, I felt like it was really important that everybody felt valued, and we all got along, and we had a lot of, I was a little schizophrenic. I mean, we had, as Zach remembers, we had all kinds of different projects going on in that space. And, I think friendships formed, in particular, Zach and I, it's always so fun to have somebody who's as talented. You get a really, really talented individual who's just kind of moving not only their understanding, but your understanding and the field's understanding way faster than you thought would happen. And so I think we formed a good bond. We also, I think Zach and I shared, we built a climbing wall in my garage together, which was a super fun project. So, we shared more than just the interest in the science of, human performance. And, when you have the opportunity to mentor somebody, I don't think of that as a 4-year and done exercise. It's always one of those things where you want to see these individuals just achieve continuing success and grow their careers and that. So when Zach asked me if I wanted to be a part of, growing Biomotum, I was like, of course, that sounds like a really fun thing to do. And I have had I think Zach knew I would probably say yes also because I don't tend to do anything for that long. So I was done with the Nike thing for that's a whole nother story, but, and, looking for, another opportunity to make an impact. So, I think I was grateful and still am for the opportunity. It's been super fun.
Yeah, you described like the multiple projects as schizophrenic, but I actually think that it's kind of, it shows how you have multiple passions and you kind of integrate what you're doing into all of them. And I just like, it's cool to see that in both of you and the stories you've told already. And now what you're doing with Biomotum, we're really curious, Ray, if you want to start and just tell us a bit about the current projects that you're excited about with Biomotum, maybe how you've narrowed from that big list of what you were doing in the beginning to what you're focused on now. And then Zach, after, could you just tell us the crossover with your research at the University of Arizona and how you manage both of those?
Yeah, I'll start by saying that the technology that we're using is entirely of Zach and his team's creation. So I'm going to take no ownership of that at all. I say that with, it's definitely not mine. So my job has been to really try to figure out how you take something that clearly has potential impact on, a group of people. I mean, it's a technology that works. You have evidence. You see it improving the lives, in particular, of these pediatric patient populations with cerebral palsy. The challenge that I've been trying to help navigate is how do you actually make that available to people in, as a product? I mean, how do you actually get it into their hands so that they can use it? Physical therapists can use it, patients can use it, it can improve their lives. And that's really what I have been more focused on. And it is drinking from a fire hose. It is extremely, there's a lot to learn when you go from the idea to making the idea into something that somebody can buy. There's a lot in there that I think neither Zach or I really sort of took full, I'm still like, really? Oh man, that sounds hard. So it's been a whole nother education for sure. And so I focus more on the business side, and leave all of the science to Zach. And he just keeps producing cool, we can use it for this, and we can use it for that, we can use it for that. It does make it, in terms of focusing, it's you can't do that broad sort of thing in this, especially in the medical device industry. It's just not, it's not an approach that can work. It can work if you're building something that's not inside the medical device system. But once you go, if you're saying, all right, we want to help patients with diagnosed medical conditions, you have to stay really, really focused on what your product is, who it's for, how it's going to work, who it's going to work for. And that's felt a little, I think for both Zach and I, a little constraining. It's like, you'd like to do this and this and this and this and this, but at the end of the day, you have to show that you can bring something closer to market, show to investors, to, other organizations. So.
Do you have any, sorry, I have a quick question before Zach answers. I'm just wondering if you have any insights on how you narrow down, because this is definitely something that I've felt before when we develop something and I'm like, we can use it for so many different populations of people and diseases and these different things. And then, it really, you do have to narrow it down and kind of be specific at first. And it does feel constraining. And I'm wondering, in your experience, what has been helpful in figuring out where to start that initial focus?
Two things. Don't drink too much of your own Kool-Aid. You probably need something useful, but it may not It may not be,
Yeah.
it's probably not as exciting to anybody else as it is to you. So just start there,
Yeah.
right? And the second thing is identify where the unmet need is.
Mhm.
So figure out who needs it. What is the urgent unmet need where somebody sees it and goes, that would change my life, right?
Mm.
And that's where you need to focus. Other responses you might get are, that's interesting. That's kind of cool. And so I think you really have to be humble about, in particular, if you're building something that people probably haven't had any experience with, powered orthoses or light nimble exoskeletons like we're making. It's not like you're going to walk in and go, oh, this is the latest version of, it's like, oh, I've never seen anything like that before. So you're trying to focus on an area where you think that the greatest opportunity is, in terms of you have a willing and ready market for your product. If you don't do that and you don't do that homework, we've seen a lot of companies not succeed because they've built a product and then tried to find a customer. That's a hard thing to do.
Yeah. Build the hammer, look for the nail.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And we do it. I mean, we do it all the time, right? This will work.
Totally.
And then you realize, well, yeah, it probably does work, but nobody wants it right now.
Mm-hmm.
Too early, it's too expensive, it's too something, so that would be my advice, Melissa. Yeah, good question.
Yeah, thanks. That makes a lot of sense. I like the first part, don't drink your own Kool-Aid. I think just be realistic about things. Yeah, but then the second part of finding the need, I think, is something really important. And something I think we always need reminding of. So thank you for sharing that.
Yeah, labs can be isolating.
Mm.
Yeah. Academia can be isolating.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, Zach, it's finally your turn to. We're really excited to hear, about your experience.
Yeah, I mean, one thing I want to add is it turns out that the idea and the prototype is just by far and away the easiest part. And it's all, and so Ray was kind of minimizing his contributions in those aspects, but Biomotum wouldn't exist without him, and he's doing the much, much, much harder part, which is trying to turn this idea into a product that can help people's lives. And everything from fundraising to, designing not designing, but implementing and deciding on a regulatory pathway, quality management system, building a team on a shoestring budget. It's just tremendously difficult. I think at the end, it's going to be rewarding, and it's certainly very challenging. So I wanted to make that, crystal clear. I think to speak to a little bit about maybe the idea, what's really motivated us is really practical, realistic solutions to improving mobility. So I've never really been interested in tethered exoskeletons, for example. So always jumping right into battery-powered wireless systems that we first test in the lab, but ultimately, they're kind of intended to be used outside of the lab, ultimately at home and in the community. And so our trajectory has kind of followed that, where we developed this battery-powered exoskeleton and first tested in a really controlled environment in the lab on a treadmill. But knowing that we want to get outside of the lab, we develop adaptive controllers that allow us to provide assistance that adapts to different terrains, different gait patterns, different gait pathologies. Clinically evaluating the technology, then over ground, and then on inclines and declines and stairs, and then across mixed terrain. So that's been kind of our trajectory. And one other kind of unique thing about our technology is we don't think about it just as an assistive exoskeleton, where it's providing positive power to the user. It's also a gait rehabilitation tool where we resist specific targeted movements to increase recruitment of muscle groups that could really benefit from this targeted therapy. So for where we've started with the technologies with cerebral palsy, And the goal is to improve plantar flexor muscle recruitment. So through that improved recruitment, we can reduce or minimize some of the pathological gait patterns. So reducing crouch, increase forward propulsion, walking speed. And we do that by resisting the plantar flexor muscles through using the device and also incorporating real-time biofeedback. That's kind of a holistic perspective that we've taken, where we want to develop a single platform that can be used both to help a kid, keep up with their family when they're walking the dog around the block, but also something that can be used at home. So ultimately, they don't need to use the device, because I think if there's anything we've learned or I've learned over the last 10 years is no one wants to wear a leg brace, powered or otherwise, if they can help it. So our goal is to make that a reality.
Yeah, that's really cool to hear. I think a question that used to come up a lot with exoskeletons is, are muscles going to be atrophying because you're giving them assistance, or, how is that going to be affecting strength? But I really like that you're saying that your device doesn't just serve as assistant, but also potentially helping, to improve gait, recruit different muscles that are beneficial for improving their gait. And yeah, I think it's something that I haven't heard of much before, but it's really motivating. I think you can see the motivation to help people kind of move away eventually from assisted device, if that's possible. And I think about that sometimes with technology just in general, or apps on your phone or that sort of thing that are meant to like help with therapies or treatments. And it's like, how can we support people in a way where eventually they don't need that anymore? But I hadn't heard that with exoskeletons, so it's really cool to hear that. A question that I had actually was, before the interview, Ray shared some work by Professor Elliot Roos, who's leading work motivating strategies for lower limb exoskeletons, in which individuals customize assistance according to their unique preferences. And I'm curious how user preference plays a role in your work at Biomotum and the exoskeletons that you're building. I know, Zach, maybe you want to start off.
Yeah, so something that comes to mind is when you're developing a product that someone will choose to use, whether or not they do so really comes down to how they feel about it and how the device makes them feel, and not some other biomechanical measure like metabolic cost of transport. And so we kind of keep that in mind when evaluating the technology and developing different control strategies, and how the device fits and feels on the body, because you could increase positive ankle power by 50%, but if it doesn't feel beneficial to the person, then it's gonna end up in their closet. And I think that's really important to Ray and I, that we're not just creating more closet junk.
Yeah.
So
yeah.
We really value the user experience, and we try and capture that lived experience when we certainly, as biomechanists, want to perform all of the biomechanical evaluations, and that's where I certainly really enjoy spending my kind of my focus. But in terms of the product development process, the user experience, I think, is absolutely critical. And so we like to incorporate that throughout the development process, in whether or not it's how do we evaluate a more effective biofeedback mechanism and get people involved in that aspect of the device, or whether it's tuning assistance. And so the work by Elliot Rouse at Michigan is really interesting, and he's certainly a leader in that space, I think.
Totally.
Challenges assumptions, right? I think you can't assume. You have to ask. We built a lot of exoskeletons early on because we assumed that people with complete spinal cord injury, their number one goal in life was to walk. That isn't true. If you ask them, they have a lot of other things on their list when you've incurred, even if it's lower limb paralysis, that are really high priority things, right? They want to maybe be able to stand. That's usually pretty important on the list. They want to be able to have sex. They want to be able to get rid of a bag that stores, their waste. There's a lot of things that they would like to have different, that they would prioritize. And they've got a powered wheelchair that goes 4.5 miles an hour. It gets them around wherever they want to go. So, when you look at it from that perspective, you go, the assumption was that, this is going to be life-changing for them. But then we built these huge, complicated, expensive, and heavy systems to have people move at a 0.5 mile an hour and expected them to jump for joy. And they were like, that's kind of cool. But so Zach is exactly right. You really have to think about what are the things technically and mechanically and physiologically it can do, but those have to be important to the person who, whether it's a physical therapist, whether it's a patient, they have to want that. Because otherwise you've made something that, it might work, but it isn't viable. And I think exoskeletons in general have kind of assumed too much.
Totally.
And Elliot's work is interesting to me because he's sort of saying, well, let's not assume. Let's measure. Let's ask. Let's talk about it. And I think that's refreshing. I think it's really good for the field because what we'll learn, could be it will challenge the assumptions, and then maybe we won't necessarily design exoskeletons purely and measure our success by whether they've reduced the cost of walking. Right? I don't know. If you ask just about anybody, unless they suffer from really severely impaired mobility, like peripheral vascular disease or other conditions where walking is extremely difficult, and they want to walk, that's the second part that we don't often talk about very much, right? Is oftentimes people that have a really, really hard time walking, it's not very appealing. It's like they'd rather get around some other way. It's people that are like, and this is what I think Zach is right in regards to the rehabilitative effect. I mean, we see the value of what we're doing as much on improving walking performance for individuals that really want that.
Right.
It's not a tool necessarily for somebody who is more severely impaired that doesn't really want to improve their mobility. They have other solutions that they'll adopt. So
this is reminiscent, one, I think Melissa and I couldn't shake our heads in agreement or say, agree with you more on your whole philosophy in this process. And just huge kudos to you for really following through on that and doing good on that and going beyond just the millions of papers in academic literature that only are optimizing for metabolic costs. So maybe not millions, but the many. And this actually, this is reminiscent of a story that you shared with us about receiving a phone call from a woman with a 20-year-old daughter with cerebral palsy, and she wanted her daughter to be able to walk down the aisle at her wedding. Ray, you could share the full story, but if you share the story and kind of how do you go from that phone call to actually delivering something that's useful and user friendly and isn't going to end up as closet junk.
Yeah, and if I could add something to that, I think we're starting to hear more about getting users involved and in the process of research and development, but I think there's still not a clear grasp of what does that actually look like in practice. So maybe with this example, if you could share what that did look like, that would be really interesting.
Yeah. So one thing I wasn't prepared for. Zach did not prepare me for this, which I don't know how I feel about it. I'm psychologically scarred.
Traumatized.
I was like, cool, this is going to be so great. I was not prepared for the emotional reaction of, in particular, parents of children who have, these children. When they're sitting there and they're watching their child move in this device, and they're like, that is a life-changing experience, and that is exactly what you hear. It is extremely emotional. I mean, it is, and I was not prepared for how I would feel in that situation. It was very, very humbling and incredibly motivating, because you see how much these parents and these kids are heroic. What they do every day, it just blows my mind. And they do it just like it's what they do every day, right? And so my brother lives in Salt Lake City. He's a personal trainer and does really interesting stuff. And I asked him if somehow we got connected to this family. And yeah, this woman reached out, as people do all the time, and said, I've seen this. This is really interesting. And the idea was that her daughter's 20, and she said, I think she could actually walk down the aisle of her wedding if you had your technology. And I was like, oh man, that's a really tall order. That's like, but that's really tangible. So, I went to Salt Lake and put it on her, met her at my brother's facility. And, we had that experience. I got to, it made a big difference for her. Could she walk down the aisle of her wedding? Probably, if she used it enough, and that's really where we are in the journey. We're at that not quite place where you can't just say, here, you can have it. It's a regulated medical device that's not cleared for that intended purpose yet. And this is a bad example of usability. I'll get into your question, Melissa, about usability in a second, because there's a more formal way to do it that you actually have to do when you're developing this technology. But being and Zach cringes a little bit when I go and do this with people, because we probably shouldn't in some ways. There's probably, but I think there's more benefit than there is risk. And this is, I think, one of the things that you sort of have to accept, right? We're in this place where we have this technology, we think it's helpful, we have a lot of demand and people reaching out and they want to use it. But you can't let them have it. But you can maybe provide them a glimpse of what it's like, and then keep them informed so that when you're ready to give it to them and they can use it, officially, you can deliver it to them. And that's where we are with this family and many other families. But to your point, Melissa, so if you are going to build a regulated medical device product, you're required by the FDA to do usability. You actually have to sit down with users. You have to identify what their needs are. You have to test repeatedly that you're actually able to meet those needs with your product. So, there's a well-defined process of product development that medical device companies have used long before we came along, that really we're interacting with users in a very direct way because our product does. There are other, obviously, if you're working on something that's under the skin, it's a different experience. But so it's interesting, because if you stayed in a research laboratory and you conducted biomechanics research and robotics research, and you never start thinking about if you're going to commercialize that, like, how does that actually get out to help people? How do I make my thing actually get into the real world? I wish we taught more of that, what that process is like, what's required. It's not rocket science by any stretch. It's procedures and processes that you have to follow, and they're well documented. But you have to spend time with people with the product, and they have to give you feedback. And if you haven't done that, you will not clear your device. FDA would say didn't test it on enough people, not just for safety and effectiveness. This is different. This is usability.
Yeah.
They get it on.
I want to add something. We learned that's really important. We've gotten to know some of our research participants extremely well. They've worked with us in the lab for 4 or 5 years as the technology has developed. And in many ways, they've become our kind of friends, and we genuinely enjoy seeing them. But we also really value their feedback. And it turns out that kids and adults are really intuitive at they're intuitive. They know kind of the answer that you may want to be arriving at. Like, is the device helpful? Is it better than this? And oftentimes, they'll tell you what you want to hear, and they pick up on that. And so getting their actual experience and their actual honest feedback is quite a bit more difficult. And I think when we were starting, it was more of this ignorance is bliss mindset. Like, look, we are drinking from our Kool-Aid, like Ray was saying. We've created this amazing device. All of our participants, they love it. They want to use the device instead of walking without it. And there's really, you could stop there and be ignorant, or you could dig deeper. And we've had to learn how to ask questions in such a way where we get an honest answer. And I think that's something that I've learned that applies across many domains in biomechanics, not just exoskeletons.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. Actually, I'm trying to remember. I remember listening to a talk on something similar before, where they were doing user studies, I think with exoskeletons actually, and they were talking about how they actually realized that they couldn't ask the right questions. So they just stopped asking so many questions. And instead, they just kind of let them start sharing organically and kind of speak out loud what they were thinking. Because it can be tricky to ask questions that are allowing people to answer honestly, especially when you're the one that designed it. You're excited, like everyone's excited to try it, and it's like especially if you're present too. They might want to not like make you feel bad or something like that. So there's a lot of nuance in getting user feedback that we might not necessarily think about at first.
Mm-hmm. You can tell somebody, and we've done this. I'm sheepishly admitting that we've done this. You can actually tell somebody that it's on when it's off, and they'll respond like, "Oh, this feels amazing. I can totally feel it working," but it's doing nothing.
Mm-hmm.
So that's to Zach's point. You have to be really thoughtful about the experience that you create for an individual and make it one where you can actually get feedback. And I think what I've learned, having used the device with lots of different people, mostly in more of a demonstration role, is I don't really ask them a lot of questions. I just watch. There's a lot you can learn just by observing, how people are, are they into it? Are they, thinking about it? Physical therapists are the worst. They just overthink it like crazy. They're just like walking super slow, and they're trying to figure out every little thing that the device is doing. And, and then I'm just like, will you just walk? I mean, this is a walking device. It's not a walk device. So, anyway, Zach's right. There's a lot more nuance that in getting feedback about, the devices, any kind of system like this, and we're not trained to do it, right? I mean, there's people who run focus groups all the time who are experts at doing this, but they do. They extract really interesting information, and it goes to sort of this. There's all these other. When you do this, when you're trying to commercialize, you run into all these other experts. Right? There's your regulatory expert. There's your quality expert. There's your usability expert. There's your legal expert. It's a super collaborative experience. It has to be, otherwise you won't succeed.
I love that. And I think it highlights a point we were making earlier and sort of before the interview about the human side of science, right? And, thinking about all of these things from so many different perspectives, including in how you're getting feedback. So thank you so much for sharing those experiences. I think that'll be super helpful and exciting to hear for our audience. On another piece of the human side of science, Ray, you mentioned you're passionate about preparing students for entrepreneurial experiences. You think that's something that should be taught more. And so if you could just maybe give us, quick top 3 tips for students who maybe want to be entrepreneurs. I think Melissa and I've thought about this a lot in our own careers, but like feel like we don't know where to start or don't know how to be prepared for that journey. And yeah, so any advice that you think is helpful would be great.
Yeah, I'll give a couple of things. One is just be observant. So look around in your domain and look for ways that you think you see if you can identify things that maybe that could be done differently. Right? Like where's the pain points in things? Could be something you're working on, could be something you see, could be somebody getting on and off a bus. I don't know what it is, right? But just be curious about the world and look for, because that sets you up in the mindset of an entrepreneur, right? Which is, I've noticed this, and I think there's a better way to do that, right? So that's one piece of advice: is be open and curious. Don't drink too much of your own Kool-Aid. You're extremely bright, talented, blah blah blah. But you have to watch. You have to look, and the second thing I think I would say is if you get a chance to intern or get your first job, do it at a startup. It should be mandatory. Do it at a startup. You'll learn way more about being an entrepreneur by being in a small company that's trying to survive than you will by reading about it or taking a class about it or studying about it. Just do it. Just get in, find an internship. Small companies like ours are always looking for talent because we don't have the capital to afford huge staffs. So live it. Find something that is, and that's not hard. It's really not. I think you have to learn where to find those companies, right? It's a different channel. You have to go and look at where you can go to angel groups, venture capital groups that interact with these portfolio companies. Mm-hmm. And the third thing I would say is you have to have a robust tolerance for failure. You can't be, it's like because you're going to bang your head against a bunch of things and many of them are not going to work. And mm-hmm. I mean, this is the fourth startup that I've been on. And for the most part, the other three, we sold one of them a long time ago, but most haven't worked. That's okay. We're just moving the field forward. So you have to have kind of a thick skin. He'll know a lot. You can know a lot more. It's like, if you think about applying for a grant or writing a paper times 100, it's kind of so you just have to have that mindset of I'm just going to keep going. So that'd be a few things that I think we need way more young people to enter into startups than we're getting. Way more.
Yeah. Well, those are great tips to start. Be observant, live it, and be tolerant to failure. I think are great places to start as students, and exciting to get in that space. Zach, do you have anything to add to that?
I mean, it's going to be more difficult than you think it is. And people are going to tell you that it's more difficult than you think it is. And you're like, yeah, I get it. It's going to be more difficult. But it's still, I don't know. It's like still beyond that. In whatever it is you're doing. And I think it's just really important to find your motivation and reconnect with what's motivating you to be an entrepreneur and to do something new in the world and something novel. Because without that motivation, you're just going to burn out.
And it is 100% okay if you don't want to be an entrepreneur.
Yeah.
Right? The other thing, it's not for everybody. It really isn't. I mean, if you want job security, if you want, you love like hierarchy, you really sort of feel like you've got your list. It's really well defined. Every day, it doesn't change very much, right? I mean, great. Then go down that path for sure. But if you want, if chaos is a little bit more okay, then you'll probably do fine in a startup. And a lot of direction. I drive Zach crazy because like, well, we should do this. Oh my God, really? I mean, what about the last thing we just talked about? So.
Yeah, those are great points though. I mean, it takes a special person, I think, to thrive in chaos. So to your point, it's not for everyone, but if someone is interested, these are great points. And if they want to experience it and see what it's like, try to get involved in a startup in some way and test it out and see if it's for you. So yeah, thank you for sharing all of that with us. We actually just have one question left, but before we ask that, we wanted to quickly ask how people can best follow you in your work or learn more about Biomotum.
Well, we post quite a bit on LinkedIn because it's really more of a professional network, for us. So, and Instagram. So you can follow us there, Biomotum or Biomotum Health on Instagram. Our website is usually pretty good. I'm not personally much of a social media person, so I'll start by saying that. So you won't find me doing a lot of that activity. But I would say to any listener, please reach out. I'm easy to find. I'll give you that challenge. I'm not going to tell you how to find me. So if you want to reach out, you figure that out. Since that's the first bar, then I'll respond.
There's be some barriers to entry.
Yeah, exactly.
You gotta want it a little bit. And from the scientific perspective, Zach's lab is immensely productive in regards to publications and papers and grants. So I would say that's another great way to keep up from the academic scientific perspective.
Yeah, that sounds great. I think we'll add those websites and social media handles, and we can add your website too, Zach, to the show notes. So that's really helpful. Thanks. So our final question is, what are you most excited about for the future of biomechanics? Zach, do you want to start us off?
I'd love to. Yeah. I think I'm going to cheat a little bit and kind of talk about what I'm hopeful for with Biomotum. But I can't wait until we have wearable robots in the home for kids with cerebral palsy. That's what I'm really hopeful for. I'll just keep it at that.
That's not cheating.
I am for biomechanics as a field. Boy, that's a big question, right? My gosh. I'm fascinated by what is going to happen with our increasing ability to understand how people are interacting with their environments in real time, whether they have a disability or not. That feels like we're going to have a lot of opportunities to better understand what the challenges are for those individuals, because we'll be able to figure out, not through survey or some other pieces, but so I think those tools are going to be really interesting, whether it's, something that you wear, whether it's computer vision, that's looking at how you're moving, whether that's you have permission to do that or not will be a whole nother question. But I think that's a vision I think we've had for a little while, in terms of how can we apply our knowledge to the real world challenges that exist for individuals, and then moving the laboratory. I can envision the future of biomechanics where all the work's happening out in the field. None of it's happening in the lab.
Right.
You do the lab to maybe do some validation or some verification of your, that you're measuring what you think you are. But yeah. And to Zach's point, there are 1 billion people on the planet who the simple task of walking is hard. If we can make a dent in that in some way, that's enough.
Yeah. And I think you are. And, this podcast has been incredible to get to talk to you about how you're making that journey and where you started there, and also just see an amazing friendship and collaboration between the two of you and how you play off one another, your modesty and humility, and, but also the pump up of each other and, kind of being each other's number one fan. That's been just really great and refreshing to see. And I think Melissa and I, that's something we really value too. So thank you so much for sharing your experiences, for being here. And yeah, we're just so excited to have you, and hopefully we'll come visit you all in in the future too.
Yeah, for sure. Doors are always open.
Biomechanics off our minds.